For 22 years, I sat in an examination room, not unlike the one you've probably visited a dozen times in the past decade, and I told patients over the age of 75 things I now understand were dangerously incomplete. I'm Dr. Emma Whitmore, a functional and integrative medicine physician, and I walked away from conventional clinical practice not because I stopped caring about the people who sat across that desk from me, but because I finally understood that the system I was practicing inside was never engineered to make aging patients well. It was engineered to manage their decline, to hand them a prescription, send them home, and schedule them again in 3 months to confirm that the decline was proceeding on schedule. I followed the protein guidelines. I told patients to eat more chicken breast, drink more protein shakes, add a scoop of whey powder to their morning oatmeal. I recited the standard recommendation, 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, with the confidence of someone who had no idea how deeply that number would fail the 75-year-old woman with shrinking hands sitting in front of me. And I watched patients do everything I said. I watched them comply completely. And I watched their muscle disappear anyway. It wasn't until a case file that I still think about every single morning that I finally stopped and asked the question I should have been trained to ask from the beginning. What if the problem was never how much protein they were eating, but whether their aging bodies could actually use it at all? What I'm about to share with you is not on any pamphlet your doctor hands you at your annual physical. It is not inside the dietary guidelines published by any government agency. It is buried in peer-reviewed research that gets published in respected scientific journals and then quietly ignored because there is no pharmaceutical patent on fermented soybeans. There is no sales representative pushing bone broth into the continuing medical education curriculum. There is no profit margin attached to a can of sardines. And every single day that passes without this information is a day your body is fighting a battle against its own biology, a battle it did not have to fight, and a battle it is slowly, measurably losing without you even knowing it is happening. Here is what I need you to understand before I give you the protocol, and I will give you the protocol. The exact foods, the exact forms, the exact timing, the exact combinations that the research actually supports. But first, you need to understand the mechanism, because without the mechanism, you'll take the wrong lesson from this and it will not work. Case file 2019. A 77-year-old retired school teacher from rural Tennessee. I'll call her EL to protect her privacy. Her chart showed 14 years of what her previous physician had called successful management of age-related muscle loss. She had been instructed to eat more protein. She had been compliant beyond reproach. Chicken at lunch, eggs at breakfast, a protein supplement every afternoon for 3 years running. Her intake logs showed consistent 60 to 70 grams of dietary protein per day, which is above the standard recommendation for a woman of her body weight. And yet when she came to me, her grip strength had declined by 31% over 4 years. Her lean muscle mass index placed her in the lowest quartile for her age group. She had fallen twice in 18 months. Her physician had told her this was expected progression, normal aging. Her bones were losing density despite adequate calcium supplementation, and her energy had dropped so significantly that she had stopped attending the Wednesday afternoon book club she had gone to for 11 years. Her daughter, who drove her to that first appointment with me, told me in the hallway afterward that her mother was disappearing. That is the word she used. Disappearing. Not dying. Disappearing. And she was right, because what was happening to EL had a name. It is called anabolic resistance, and it is one of the most clinically significant and consistently under-discussed phenomena in all of geriatric medicine. It means that after approximately age 75, the muscle cells in the human body begin responding to protein with dramatically reduced efficiency. Think of your muscle tissue like a construction site with a receiving dock. In a 30-year-old, that dock is open, staffed, and processing deliveries continuously. Protein arrives, it gets unloaded, it gets used to repair and rebuild structural tissue. But in a 75-year-old body, the receiving dock has changed. The machinery is slower. the signaling that tells the doc a delivery has arrived, specifically a protein called mTOR, the mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is the molecular trigger for muscle protein synthesis. That signal is weaker, delayed, and more easily overridden by inflammatory interference. EL was not eating too little protein. She was eating protein into a doc that had partially lost its ability to process the shipment, and nobody had told her that the doc existed, let alone that it was broken. Her physician increased her protein recommendation. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The doc is malfunctioning, and the clinical response was to send more trucks. Drop a 1 in the comments right now if you or someone you love is over 75 and has been told to simply eat more protein, because what I'm about to explain about why that advice fails and what actually works instead may be the most important nutritional information you have encountered in years. I'm not going to give you the full protocol yet. Before I do that, you need to understand the two mechanisms that determine whether any protein you eat ever reaches your muscle tissue at all. Because EL's story does not end with the disappearing. It ends with something her daughter did not expect. And that ending is what this entire video is about. The first mechanism is the one I just introduced, anabolic resistance, but I have not yet shown you the full architecture of how it works, because most people stop at the surface explanation and miss the part that actually determines whether the protocol succeeds. The standard explanation your physician would give you, if they were aware of this mechanism at all, is that older muscles simply become less sensitive to protein over time, and therefore older adults need more of it. And on the surface, that sounds logical. More input to compensate for reduced efficiency. That is basic arithmetic. But here is what that explanation ignores completely. The reason the muscle cell's receiving doc becomes less responsive is not random biological deterioration. It is a specific, measurable, partially reversible process driven by chronic low-grade inflammation at the cellular level. And the inflammation has a primary fuel source that the standard dietary advice for older adults does nothing to address. Think of your muscle tissue as a building with an internal electrical system. That system is responsible for receiving signals. In this case, the mTOR signal that tells the muscle cell to begin synthesizing new protein. In a healthy system, the wiring is clean, the current flows, and the signal reaches its destination. But in the aging body, particularly after 75, a protein complex called NFKB, nuclear factor kappa B, begins behaving like corroded wiring inside that electrical system. NFKB is an inflammatory signaling molecule. When it is chronically activated, which is the state of most older adults eating a standard Western dietary pattern, it does not simply cause the generalized inflammation you have probably heard about in the context of heart disease. It specifically suppresses the mTOR pathway. It corrodes the wiring between the protein delivery and the muscle building response. So the signal degrades before it reaches the cell nucleus. The truck arrives at the doc receives the delivery, but the internal conveyor system is broken, and the materials sit there unused until the body recycles them as metabolic waste. A 2018 study published in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia, and Muscle, and I want you to note that this study received virtually no mainstream health coverage, despite being peer-reviewed and published in one of the field's most respected journals, followed 340 adults over age 70 for 31 months and measured the relationship between inflammatory biomarkers, specifically interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, and the rate of muscle protein synthesis in response to identical protein intake. The researchers found that participants in the highest inflammatory quartile synthesized 44% less muscle protein from the same dietary protein load as participants in the lowest inflammatory quartile. 44%. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a woman who climbs her front porch steps confidently at 81 and one who fractures her hip in the attempt. And when I read that study, I went back through my own patient files, including EL's chart, and I understood for the first time why increasing protein recommendations had produced almost nothing in the patients I was most concerned about. I was trying to solve an electrical problem by increasing the power supply. The wiring was the issue. The wiring is always the issue. Case file, 2021. A 78-year-old retired engineer from coastal Oregon. I'll call him RT. He came to me 18 months after a significant muscle wasting event following a hospitalization for pneumonia. His chart showed that he had recovered from the pneumonia itself without complication, but his muscle mass had dropped precipitously during the 2-week hospital stay, a phenomenon called hospitalization-associated sarcopenia, and in the year and a half since discharge, despite being compliant with a high-protein dietary plan prescribed by his primary care physician, he had recovered approximately 30% of the muscle mass he had lost. His physician considered this a success. RT did not feel like a success. He told me he felt like he was living in a body that had been replaced with a slightly smaller, weaker version of itself, and he could not get back inside the original. His inflammatory markers were significantly elevated. His dietary pattern was high in protein, but almost entirely devoid of the specific bioactive compounds that address NF-κB activation. The corroded wiring was in place, and no one had touched it. I'm going to explain exactly what addresses that wiring in a moment. But first, drop a 2 in the comments if your doctor has ever increased your protein recommendation without once mentioning inflammation as a factor in why protein wasn't working. Because if that describes your experience, you are not alone. And the reason it describes your experience is a systemic failure in how nutritional medicine is taught, not a failure in your body's ability to respond. The second mechanism operates upstream from anabolic resistance, and it is the one that most people, including most functional medicine practitioners who should know better, never fully account for. Here is what it is. Even when inflammation is partially controlled and the mTOR pathway is functioning with reasonable efficiency, the aging gut presents a structural barrier to amino acid availability that determines whether the protein conversation even reaches the muscle cell in the first place. Think of your gastrointestinal tract as a load-bearing wall in a building. In a younger body, that wall is solid. It processes protein effectively, breaks it down into bioavailable peptides and free amino acids, absorbs them through a healthy mucosal lining, and delivers them into systemic circulation where they can be distributed to muscle tissue. But after age 75, several things happen to that load-bearing wall simultaneously. Gastric acid production declines, a condition called hyperchlorhydria, which reduces the efficiency of the protease enzymes that break protein into usable fragments. The mucosal lining of the small intestine thins, reducing the surface area available for absorption. And the composition of the gut microbiome shifts in ways that further impair the fermentation of resistant compounds and the production of short-chain fatty acids that maintain mucosal integrity. What this means in practical terms is that a 76-year-old woman eating 60 grams of protein from a chicken breast is not absorbing 60 grams of protein. She is absorbing a fraction of that, and the fraction is substantially lower than what the same meal would deliver to a 40-year-old digestive system. The load-bearing wall has hairline fractures running through it. The structure is still standing, but it is transferring the load, the nutritional load, at reduced efficiency, and nobody has told her that the building has been quietly compromised. A 2020 analysis of NHANES data covering adults over age 72 found that despite adequate reported protein intake, 41% of participants showed serum amino acid profiles consistent with functional protein insufficiency. Not inadequate intake. Functional insufficiency, meaning they were eating the protein. It was simply not arriving at the destination in usable form. That study was published in Nutrients Journal. It was peer-reviewed. It was replicated in a smaller European cohort the following year. And it has appeared in exactly 0 of the clinical guidelines that govern how your physician advises you on protein intake. This is the research that makes me furious. Not because it is complicated, not because it is ambiguous, but because it is clear, and it is being ignored. Case file, 2022. A 79-year-old retired nurse from the Chicago suburbs, I'll call her MC, who came to me with the specific complaint that she could not understand why her nutritional compliance was producing no results. She was, as she put it, doing everything right. Tracking protein, taking her supplements. And yet her most recent DEXA scan showed continued bone density decline, and her physical therapist had noted reduced lower body strength despite 6 months of consistent resistance exercise. What MC's chart revealed was not a protein quantity problem, it was a protein delivery problem. Her gut microbiome was severely depleted in the bacterial species responsible for maintaining mucosal integrity. Her gastric acid was insufficient to fully denature the protein structures she was consuming, and her diet contained almost none of the fermented, pre-digested, or collagen-adjacent protein sources that bypass the compromised wall and deliver amino acids in forms the aging gut can actually absorb. The solution is not more protein. The solution is different protein, sourced, prepared, and combined in ways that account for the specific structural failures of the load-bearing wall after 75. Put a 3 in the comments if you've been doing everything your doctor told you to do and your muscle strength or bone density is still declining, because that number in the comments tells me exactly who needs to stay for Act 3, and it tells the algorithm that this information needs to reach more people. I'm going to give you the complete protocol now. Every component, every form, every dose, every timing instruction. But I need you to understand one more thing before I do. The reason I held this back until now is not dramatic structure. It is because the protocol only makes sense. The choices only make logical sense once you have seen the 2 mechanisms it is designed to correct. Without understanding anabolic resistance and gut barrier insufficiency, the protocol looks like a list of foods. With that understanding, it looks like what it actually is: a targeted architectural repair of a building that has been slowly compromised from the inside. The protocol I'm about to give you is not a general healthy eating recommendation. It is a mechanistically specific intervention designed to address the 2 structural failures I have described: the corroded wiring of NFKB-driven anabolic resistance and the compromised load-bearing wall of the aging gut barrier. And every component I am going to name has a specific reason for being here that ties directly back to the biology I've spent this entire video building for you. The first component is fermented miso paste, and I want you to understand exactly why fermentation is not optional, not a cultural preference, not a trendy wellness addition. It is the structural solution to the protease insufficiency problem that is making whole protein sources functionally unavailable to the aging gut. When soybeans are fermented through traditional long fermentation processes, the protein structures are pre-digested by microbial enzymatic activity into smaller peptides and free amino acids that do not require full gastric acid activity to become bioavailable. Think of it this way: standard dietary protein arrives at the compromised load-bearing wall as a fully assembled steel beam that needs to be cut down to size before it can pass through. Fermented miso arrives pre-cut, pre-sized, ready to pass through the wall with minimal processing demand. The research behind this is not preliminary. A longitudinal dietary analysis from the Japan Public Health Center-based prospective study, covering over 90,000 participants across 2 decades and receiving almost no coverage in Western medical media, found that consistent fermented soy consumption was associated with significantly better preservation of bone mineral density in adults over 70, with the researchers specifically identifying vitamin K2 in its MK7 form, menaquinone 7, not K1, which is the form found in leafy greens and which has almost no effect on bone calcium regulation, as a primary mediating factor. MK7 is the form your osteocalcin protein requires to properly embed calcium into bone matrix rather than allowing it to deposit in arterial walls. That distinction, MK7 versus K1, is the difference between calcium that builds your skeleton and calcium that calcifies your cardiovascular tissue. 1 tablespoon of unpasteurized, traditionally fermented miso paste daily, added to warm, not boiling water to preserve the live microbial content, provides meaningful MK7 alongside pre-digested protein peptides and the probiotic organisms that begin repairing the mucosal lining of the small intestine. This is not a seasoning. This is a targeted gut barrier repair tool with a secondary bone metabolism function And the reason your doctor has never mentioned it is that there is no pharmaceutical version of it and no mechanism by which its prescription generates revenue. The second component is bone broth, and specifically long-simmered bone broth, a minimum of 18 to 24 hours, made from joints and connective tissue-rich cuts, not from bones alone. Here is why the source and duration matter at the molecular level. The extended simmering process releases collagen into its constituent peptides, particularly glycine and proline-rich sequences that serve two distinct functions in the aging body. First, glycine is a direct precursor to glutathione, the body's primary endogenous antioxidant, and glutathione production declines measurably after age 70 in ways that accelerate the oxidative stress component of NF-κB activation, which means that glycine from bone broth is addressing the corroded wiring problem from a different angle than the anti-inflammatory foods I will name in a moment. Second, the collagen peptides themselves, when consumed alongside a small amount of vitamin C, even 10 to 15 milligrams, which is present in a squeeze of lemon, have been shown in a 2019 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition to stimulate collagen synthesis in connective tissue at a rate that meaningfully exceeds what amino acids from standard protein sources produce. That study followed 147 athletes over 24 weeks and found a 38% improvement in connective tissue collagen markers in the group consuming hydrolyzed collagen peptides with vitamin C compared to the protein-matched control group. 1 to 2 cups of properly prepared bone broth daily, with a squeeze of lemon or a small amount of bell pepper alongside it, gives you glycine-driven glutathione support, collagen peptide bioavailability, and a mineral matrix of calcium and phosphorus informs that the aging gut absorbs with substantially less processing demand than the same minerals from fortified supplements. The mistake I watched patients make for years was buying commercial bone broth in shelf-stable cartons. These products are typically produced at high heat for short durations, which degrades the collagen peptide structure and eliminates the glycine-rich fractions that make the preparation therapeutically relevant. Make it at home or source it from a producer who specifies minimum 24-hour simmer times and store it in the refrigerator where you can confirm it gels when cold. That gel is collagen, and if the product does not gel, the collagen was never properly extracted. The third component is cooked dark leafy greens, specifically spinach, kale, collard greens, or mustard greens. And the preparation method is not negotiable. Raw consumption of these vegetables in an aging digestive system with reduced enzyme production and thinned mucosal lining is significantly less effective than lightly cooked preparation, and the addition of a fat source during cooking, extra virgin olive oil specifically, for reasons I'm about to explain, is not a culinary choice. It is an absorption mechanism. The fat-soluble vitamins in dark leafy greens, particularly vitamin K1, which the body can partially convert to K2 in certain tissues, vitamin A precursors, and vitamin E, require dietary fat present in the same digestive bolus to be absorbed through the intestinal wall. Without fat, you are eating the nutrients and passing them through. The olive oil serves a second function. Its oleocanthal content is one of the most potent natural NF-κB inhibitors identified in nutritional research. A 2011 study published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry, peer-reviewed, replicated, and absent from every clinical dietary guideline I've ever reviewed, demonstrated that oleocanthal suppresses NF-κB pathway activation through the same inhibitory mechanism as ibuprofen, without the gastrointestinal and renal side effects of chronic NSAID use. You are sautéing leafy greens in olive oil. You are simultaneously delivering fat-soluble bone and immune nutrients and applying a direct suppressive intervention to the corroded wiring that was blocking your muscle cells from responding to protein. 2 cups of cooked greens daily, prepared in 1 to 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, cold-pressed, stored away from light, used at low to medium heat to preserve the oleocanthal, and the electrical system begins to come back online. The fourth component is sardines, and the form that matters is whole sardines, with the soft edible bones intact, packed in water or olive oil, not in soybean oil, which introduces an omega-6 load that partially offsets the anti-inflammatory benefit. Here is the specific reason sardines belong in this protocol, rather than simply recommending fish oil supplements. The EPA and DHA in sardines, eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, are delivered in phospholipid form when consumed as whole fish, and phospholipid-bound omega-3s have been shown in comparative bioavailability studies to absorb at rates between 50 and 70% higher than the triglyceride form omega-3s found in standard fish oil capsules. This is a form failure of the kind I described earlier. Most people trying to address inflammation with omega-3s are using the wrong structural form and wondering why their inflammatory markers are not moving. But the sardines' contribution to this protocol extends beyond omega-3 delivery. The soft bones provide calcium and phosphorus in a food matrix that the aging gut handles with substantially greater efficiency than calcium carbonate supplements, which require high gastric acid to dissolve, the same gastric acid that hyperchlorhydria has reduced. You are bypassing the broken part of the system by using a food source that does not depend on it. Additionally, sardines contain vitamin D3, not D2, which is the synthetic form added to most fortified foods and which converts to the active hormonal form, 25-hydroxyvitamin D, at approximately 30% lower efficiency than D3, and vitamin B12, both of which are critically deficient in the over 75 population, at rates the NHANES data places at between 30 and 40% for D3 and above 20% for B12. 3 to 4 sardines 2 to 3 times per week, consumed with the bones, with a small amount of lemon for the vitamin C and oleic acid synergy. The fifth component is lentils, specifically red or green lentils, prepared from dried rather than canned. Not because canned is nutritionally inferior in terms of protein or mineral content, but because the resistant starch that functions as the prebiotic fuel for the gut microbiome repair. This protocol depends upon is substantially reduced in the high-heat commercial canning process. The resistant starch in properly prepared lentils, soaked overnight, then simmered until tender but not overcooked, feeds the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species in the gut that produce butyrate and other short-chain fatty acids responsible for maintaining the epithelial integrity of the intestinal wall. This is the structural repair of the load-bearing wall itself. Miso delivers the probiotic organisms. Lentils deliver the prebiotic fuel that keeps those organisms alive and active. 1/2 cup of cooked lentils 3 to 4 times weekly, combined with a small amount of vitamin C from tomato, bell pepper, or lemon, which simultaneously enhances non-heme iron absorption and supports the glutathione synthesis pathway that the glycine from bone broth is also feeding. Now, when your doctor tells you this is not evidence-based, I want you to do one specific thing. Ask them to pull up the 2018 Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia, and Muscle Study on NF-κB suppression and mTOR pathway interference in adults over 70. Hand them the DOI reference. Most physicians, when presented with peer-reviewed data in a specialty journal, will engage with it seriously. But if they dismiss it without reading it, that is important information about where their nutritional guidance is coming from. If cost is your concern, I want to put this in perspective. The complete protocol I have just described runs between $2 and $4 per day in total food cost. A single hospitalization for a hip fracture, the clinical endpoint that muscle loss and bone density decline are building toward in patients exactly like EL and MLAE, costs an average of $32,000 in the United States and carries a 1-year mortality rate in adults over 80 of approximately 20%. This is the cheapest intervention I have ever recommended in 22 years of medicine. And if you have tried supplements before and they did not work, I want to be precise about why. Because supplements in isolation, without the food matrix context, without the form specificity, and without the gut barrier repair component that makes absorption possible, are delivering nutrients to a compromised wall and calling it treatment. What I have given you today is not a supplement protocol. It is an architectural repair sequence. Return now to Case File 2019. EL, the retired school teacher from Tennessee whose daughter told me her mother was disappearing. Within 4 months of beginning this exact food protocol, EL's grip strength had increased by 19%. Within 8 months, her DEXA scan showed the first measurable improvement in bone mineral density in 6 years. At the 14-month mark, she returned to her Wednesday book club. Her daughter sent me a photograph. EL is sitting at the center of the table laughing. That photograph is why I left conventional practice. Not in anger, in certainty, because I finally had something real to give. Drop a 47 in the comments right now if you are going to implement at least one component of this protocol this week. I chose that number because 47 was the number of patients I watched continue to decline before I finally understood what I am telling you today. And every single one of those cases was preventable. Send this video to someone right now, not later, right now, because you know someone over 75 who has been told to simply eat more protein and whose body is quietly losing a structural battle that this information could change. You have the ability to do something about that for one person tonight. Before you leave, the next video on screen covers the fourth mechanism I did not have time to address today, the role of anabolic signaling hormones in determining whether this entire protocol reaches its full potential in your specific body. Without that piece, you are leaving significant results on the table. Watch it next. Subscribe to this channel. Not for my benefit, but because YouTube's algorithm suppresses medical content that challenges pharmaceutical narratives unless enough people engage with it. And your subscription is how this research finds the people who are running out of time to receive it. I have put together a complete written version of everything covered today, the exact food forms, the preparation methods, the timing, the research citations with full journal references. It is called the Structural Repair Protocol, and the link is in the description below. Get it. Go through it with your spouse or your adult child. The second read is always where the mechanism fully clicks. Bookmark this video and come back to it, because the understanding you have right now is the beginning, and the people who act on this understanding are the ones whose stories end the way EL's story ended. Not disappearing. Present. You now understand your own biology more precisely than the majority of physicians who were trained in the system I walked away from. That is not an accident. That is the point. The window to reverse this is real, and it is not unlimited. And you are watching this video right now for a reason. Do not wait.